Now, I would like to introduce our guest. After serving for years as a staff physician partner and OBGYN generalist at the Permanente Medical Group, Dr. Guerra retired from clinical practice and devotes his energy full-time to writing and family. He brings the uplifting message of El Doctorcito to elementary school children and is working on his second children's book. Illustrator Victoria Castillo is an artist from Texas. She has illustrated kit lit and cover art for their Arte Público Press, done editorial illustrations, created album covers, and concept art for animated feature pitches. She gets very excited by books and series that explore female identity because it's still so important for media to present positive, flawed, and funny female role models from different ethnicities, backgrounds, cultures, and ages, and for girls to feel like they can be themselves while also being empowered by the talents and interests they nurture. She loves old sci-fi, caring for cactus and succulents, curating collections of dolls, books, toys, trains, clowns, vinyl records, and monsters of various forms and sizes, and traveling whenever she can. Now I will turn the floor over to Dr. Guerra. Welcome, Dr. Guerra.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My remarks this morning will focus on the genesis of The Little Doctor, focusing on the emotional, the development of the self-efficacy behind the book, and then a more hands-on narrative of how it came together. But before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Polanco Walters for the introduction and putting this program together. I want to thank the Harvard School of Medicine and specifically the Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnerships. And of course, thank you, Susan Legere, for your energy and efforts in getting this program together today. Thank you so much. So the Little Doctor began, as the book tells you, when I was 10 years old. And the ideas, the passion, the energy, and the self-efficacy that led me to begin writing this book started back then. You see, the emotions that I experienced following that visit, that explosion of fear, anger, determination, and need to make the experience for people like my grandmother better began on that day. And the term life-changing wouldn't give it justice in terms of how I walked away from that experience. So I'll begin with that. You know, there was a self-efficacy that was formed on that day that propelled me forward. It's the same emotions that we all have that get us through difficult times. For me, it got me through the pre-med experience at Pomona College. It got me through passing my medical boards in medical school and through the many challenges that we all face in our daily jobs. And again, this sense of relentless motivation carried me, on forward. But as far as when the ink hit the paper, that did not happen until 2010. And at the time, I was a full-time obstetrician gynecologist doing deliveries and also involved in community outreach for Kaiser Permanente, giving presentations at high schools, universities, and medical schools, with the goal being to attract more Latino and African-American physicians to the organization. But after a while, I found that my message was reaching these youngsters and these young students too late in the pipeline. And add to that the arrival of our newborn, the idea of a children's book took shape. Now, don't laugh at me when I say to you that my next step was to Google how to write a children's book, as I had no clue. And I imagined that there was a process. And I immediately felt like I was back in pre-med mode. How do you get into medical school? What does one have to do? So I took those steps once again. And after that Google, I was introduced to some amazing resources. I don't knock it. That was a good first step because it introduced me to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which was a tremendous resource for me. A book titled The Essential Guide to Publishing for Children was extremely helpful. I also signed up for 2 online writing courses. One of them was through the UC San Diego campus, and I found these very, very helpful. And I'll share with you that I made time for this, for the actual writing, during the hours of 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. In the morning, baby permitting, of course. And so, you know, that was my schedule. And, you know, it seems like a daunting task, but for me, the greater challenges were the internal ones that I would create for myself. The doubt, you know, who would want to read this book? And given the political climate that arose, I kept imagining my book in a pile of other books that were being burned. And so, you know, there was that self-doubt, but I pushed through. I pushed through and began the idea of creating drafts and then sharing them. God forbid someone says they don't like it. So I overcame, you know, that sense of fear. But again, you know, I pushed on, and this went on for 5 years, you know, writing and rewriting, sharing, hearing thoughts, making changes. 5 years of that process. And again, much like my medical school experience, in 2015, I submitted my manuscript to over 50, that's 50 publishers, and only one said yes. That was Arte Público Press, affiliated with the University of Houston in Texas. And I tell you, there's nothing like yes to motivate you. You know, in closing, I would like to express how pleased I became and am with the book and how it turned out. The illustrations brought the words to life, and I couldn't have been, you know, any happier with how that turned out. You know, but I look at my story as an American story about a Latinx immigrant that's presented in positive light. And also, it's a story that lends itself to discussions, to very robust discussions, I should add, about race, culture, bilingualism, engaging our healthcare system, and other social institutions. And of course, other rich topics that are characteristic of the beautiful diversity of our democracy. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for those wonderful words. Now we would like for Victoria to please share your experience of illustrating in Doctorcito with us, please.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to also say thank you to everybody involved in this program. It's so essential and so important. And I do want to address something that Dr. Guerra said at first, is that you have to reach out to people when they're young. It's essential. The younger, the better. And the more that children receive these messages of inclusivity, of understanding, of knowing that there are other people out there who have experienced these things, the easier it is for them to navigate this very difficult world. So I'll start, you know, talking about how my journey to this book began. In May of 2015, Arte Publico Press approached me requesting a test for an upcoming children's book about a young Salvadoran boy who is helping his grandmother navigate the healthcare system, and how that experience drove him to want to help people just like her, which is to say, someone who does not speak English and who feels negatively impacted by her ethnicity, her experiences, and is experiencing the terrible sensation of feeling like culturally she's out of her time. She's been the things that she has done to take charge of her health are looked at and frowned upon in the community in which she currently lived. So I was instantly drawn to that idea. Being Latin and also assigned female at birth, I know that there are times when healthcare services can be extremely frustrating and can feel very unfriendly, and through no fault of the hardworking individuals who are trying to help. It's just a matter of, just it's the difficulties involved therein. So I felt that I had actually experienced that story as well, even without the direct connection of wanting to go into healthcare. Being born to Latin parents in the United States, I was taught both English and Spanish growing up. But mind you, my parents had only come to the United States in their 20s. That's relatively just like such a short span of time. And so they also felt prejudice and backlash simply for having accents, simply for having difficulty in communication, and for having Latin last names. So, and this reality still exists for thousands of immigrants in their professions, in their daily lives, and it's a very bitter barrier for many people. And that spoke to me. So I instantly thought that this was not only, a wonderful opportunity for me, but something incredibly important. And I thought that it would speak to more people. So this story, written by a person of color, a Latino, a professional in English and Spanish for a young audience was really essential. And therein lies my deepest connection with it. As an illustrator, I always want to impart hope and wonder. I hope that the things I contribute to can give readers a sense of wonder and connection to a wider, more magical sort of mundane. Just a world where the idea of being a doctor is synonymous with the idea of saying, I'm a superhero. Growing up and saying, I want to be a teacher is the same thing as saying, I know I'm going to impact and change lives. So I like those kinds of stories. I like that kind of heart. And those things come from a place of real commitment and real energy. And I absolutely felt that from the first time that I read this text. So that's a big reason about why I drew what I did, why the images look the way they did, sort of a magical kind of like dreamy realism, or excuse me, I guess not realism, very stylized. But so this is my first published foray into kids literature. I had done some graphic novel type of work for commissions and a kid's book that actually languished in unpublished after the writer commissioned it. And so though I had done some work, this is the first time that I was chosen to illustrate someone else's baby and to watch it come to fruition. So that's something else that I wanted to address that Dr. Guerra brought up, that the process of actually publishing a book, it's so intense and so there's so much revision involved, so much rejection, which can be really frustrating. But at the same time, you just have to remember that these stories that are being told, they have to speak to somebody. And the moment that lands on the right desk, on the right set of ears, that's when the whole ball gets rolling. So it also happened that when I met Dr. Guerra, he's very eloquent, very kind. And I could see that this story had shaped him in his practice as a healthcare provider. So I have a unique and special experience here, knowing the subject, knowing the author, and feeling a personal connection with the book through providing the illustrations. To me, it was something that was so important. And I'm really grateful that was the first experience I had with illustration. So I think that with that said, just the biggest takeaway for me was that all of these stories, all of these essential stories that shape people's lives need to be told. And it's such a blessing to be able to do that and be able to illustrate that.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing the experience of both writing and illustrating in Doctorcito. I do have questions to follow up on some of the things that both of you said. I also want to let the audience know that they can raise their hand and we can unmute their microphones to ask questions. Since this event is for the community, I want to make sure that I give them time. Anyone right now have a question? Okay, I see Ruben Diaz.
Hello, I want to thank Dr. Juan Guerra and Ms. Castillo. I'm so proud of you on working on this book. Dr. Guerra, I'm very proud of you. I'm very proud that you put your heart into the book and went through the process of having doubt whether or not it would be published, and I'm so happy to see it published. I have a question for you, Dr. Guerra. Have you been reading this book to children that are, let's say, less than 10 years old? And do you read it mostly in Spanish and English? And what's your response that you've seen from the kids?
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Diaz. I last week read it to a group of kindergartners and second graders. And the book is extremely well received. I take pictures and I get mobbed by these kids. Each time I do it, I think they are excited to see a physician while not being in the clinic and engaging and asking me questions. I mean, it's a game changer, I think, for them seeing that. And again, it's extremely well received, and it gives me more energy to keep doing that. I'm trying to create a robust logistics plan to continue doing that and just spreading the word within my community.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Does anyone else? I think I saw someone raise their actual hand. Oh yeah, David Torres.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Listen, I've enjoyed it up to this point. It's very good, very well thought out. Listen, I have a question. I think I understood that you were writing a subsequent book, or am I wrong?
No, I have submitted a second manuscript to the publisher, waiting to hear back on the thumbs up or thumbs down. But it is, in fact, a second book, and it's about the mental health challenges and cultural elements that go with having a youngster that's high energy and been told has hyperactive or attention deficit, and how many times these children, and especially children of color, may be vilified by being who they are and being different. And so again, I chose to embrace a robust topic that lends itself to much discussion and interpretation, taking into account how culturally, different communities will look at behaviors within our kids differently.
Huh. And so is this targeted to a child or to a more professional audience?
I think it's
parents?
like the El Doctorcito. It can be directed towards the parents, the children, because I think they will be intrigued by the adventures that the child gets into, and the parents may reflect on the overall message on how to process these behaviors. And just like Doctorcito, I've gotten feedback from professors of anthropology classes at a university that they use the book to convey messages, as well as kindergarten teachers. So I'm very happy with the diversity of the audience that it's reached out.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. As we wait for other audience members who may have questions, I have a few. And I was wondering if you can talk about publishing and illustrating a bilingual book. Victoria, you said that that was one of the things that you were so passionate about. You know, the book is in English and Spanish. And as someone who is a pediatrician, but also an immigrant myself, knowing how English and Spanish are so important in my day-to-day, passing that on to my children, and you know, going beyond measures to make sure that their education is both in English and Spanish so that they speak both equally, you know, fluently. I was wondering if you can discuss first the choice, why doing in both languages, and second, whether there's any challenges with them.
Would you like me to go first, Victoria?
Yeah, of course, please.
You know, again, it was how I was raised. It's part of my identity, and that I'll begin with that. You know, my parents raised us to be proud of who we are, and that included, you know, many customs and especially our language. And speaking more than one language, I think, empowers an individual to embrace the many communities, not only in our country but in the world. And I was very fortunate to work with a publisher and the publishing team. They were able to navigate that element of it, and they did the translation of the book. And again, that message of being inclusive to the diverse world that we live in was very important. And I mean, for me, it was second nature. That's who I am.
Yeah, to add to that, I think that that's one of the things that Arte Publico Press does so well, is that they have a entire range of books for children's books that are they're all bilingual. It's all English and Spanish on the same page. So when someone is able to look at the story and they're reading it to their children, or a child is reading it for the first time, they have the narrative in English and Spanish on the same page. And I agree entirely that learning a language as a child, being immersed in it from the get-go, is so important, and it shapes who you are. And then understanding that there is something else, there's a world beyond you, and that world is not something to be afraid of, but it's something to embrace and something to seek out. And as you grow, you learn that other people's ideas, other people's experiences that shape them are so important to try and empathize with. I feel like that was probably the most important thing that I was taught in growing up with the experience of having spoken more than one language. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of children, they kind of feel a fear, or they kind of feel a shame of being like, well, you know, my parents don't speak as well as someone else's parents. My parents have an accent. My parents do this, or having an experience where they realize that they're taking on a burden, much like the character in the story, of trying to translate. And I think it's so important, and especially here, especially for me in the South, in Texas, that there is such a huge population of people who speak Spanish, and so few professionals who do. And I want to see that. I want to see that more and more, that people realize that, like, hey, there's a world beyond our doorstep, and we really need to be cognizant of that. So, you know, for sure, the team at Arte Publico, who, you know, our editors and the people who did the translations of the books, they're up against a pretty big challenge, because it's not always just a direct translation of saying, like, you know, this becomes this. Sometimes that translation needs to be poetic. It needs to be just as beautiful as the native language in which the manuscript was submitted. So I think they do an excellent job of that as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thanks so much for sharing. Dr. Guerra, you talked to us and, expressed some of the roadblocks and maybe self-discouragements that you experienced as you're writing this book over a 5-year period. And what would you tell someone who thinks they may like to write a children's book? Is there any specific advice that you will offer a writer of color? So to be anyone from a racial and ethnic minority background to get their work published.
Sure, I would begin with that the adage that we all hear when we're in a writing class: write about something that you know. So if it's a story, write about a story that's heartfelt. And I can't emphasize enough, the description of the emotions that I felt on that day. They were powerful. And these are emotions, desires, and motivations, for lack of a better word, that don't leave you. And everyone will know what I'm talking about when they experience it. And so long as the next step, which is, educating yourself about the art of writing, the craft, once you are able to balance those two, your success will be in the horizon. I use the term horizon because it took a while for me, and it may not take as long for others, but having that 1-2, that sincere passion that turns into that self-efficacy, and then knowing the roadmap to follow to get your book published, and sprinkle in the overcoming of that self-doubt, and you'll reach your goal.
Thank you. And actually a follow-up question, you brought up emotions. Victoria, how do you go about illustrating to showcase the emotions? In the book, for those who have read it, you notice a different use of weather: sunny, then raining, clear, moonlit sky. How what was the process like to make sure that you showcase those emotions felt by Dr. Guerra?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And these kind of questions are it's really fun as an illustrator to receive them, because they're the things that you hope get picked up on. And yeah, absolutely. In the book, I very specifically had, sunny, like you were saying, there's images of raining and there's a moonlit sky. And all of that was meant to symbolize Salvador's emotional connection with what was going on in his life at the time. The temperatures of the illustrations were intended to convey the mood. So of course you can't do a complete 180 when you've selected a certain style. So, if I wanted to demonstrate something that was very emotionally charged, or an event that was very frightening or very impactful, I couldn't change the style. So I absolutely had to do that with colors. So even when you're using bright stylized drawings, even the moody images are still saturated, but that's exactly what was the intent. And also because you're drawing for a different audience, you're drawing for children, and they know you absolutely do not want to talk down to a child. You absolutely don't want to choose easy choices, but you also know that it's a game in order to try and convey your the emotional information. So yeah, that absolutely. And that's the fun part, I think, about being the illustrator, is that you get the job of enhancing the story.
Thank you. Ruben, do you have another question? I think I saw your hand raised.
Yes, I did. You asked my question, but I have another one that just came up. I'm thinking about the initiatives of large media companies like Disney to incorporate people of color into their storylines. But I'm wondering, how can we reach a story like Dr. Guerra's that is really based on growing up as a child of an immigrant, and have it become really just part of large media stories? And how do you think that the large media is doing in telling these stories of our communities?
That's a very good question, Ruben. And, I will try to give you a couple of sentences. This is a 5-hour discussion. But interesting that you mentioned that. I'm reading a book titled Storytelling for Social Justice by Leanne Bell. And it's a historical perspective of storytelling that traditionally, does not include diverse communities and promotes the more powerful elements of society. And so that's something that I would like to help change. And again, programs like today, I think, are a step in that direction. And because, my book, I always looked at my book as not being a mainstream story. But I got to the point where I tell myself, well, why wouldn't it be? Because it speaks to the truth of this country. And at each of my book readings, the students manifest their acknowledgement of relating to the student, to the boy in the book, Salvador, understanding and identifying with the long line that he had to wait in from the book, and also understanding that the doctor didn't spend much time engaging their relatives. And what always gets me is when I would ask the students, do you think that Abuela will follow the doctor's instructions? They all belt out a big no. And so I think the audience is out there, and it's a matter of the mainstream processes that are out there to market and distribute to want to take a chance. And the parallel that I find is with the efforts that I was a part of to try to diversify medical schools. We never get past a certain number, a comfort zone of 15% to 20% students of color. And I was always someone that advocated for a much larger number, within medical school demographics, but that's just radical me. But that's sort of the challenge that we face in seeking the change to more inclusion. I don't know if that makes sense, Ruben.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's definitely really important topic, given that numbers, while there's having some improvements, definitely does not meet what the population represents in terms of like the United States Census. Anyone else have any questions before I continue? And feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. All right, so this one, oh, sorry, go for it. Go for it. I apologize.
This is Ellen Cohn. I had raised my hand, but I guess you didn't see, and I just wanted to alert people. I am a children's book writer as well as a physician as well, and very involved in the community in the Boston area. So I just wanted to alert people that I put resources in the chat for anyone who's interested in writing children's books. And particularly if you're in the New England area, they used to have in person, but now they have online meetups, and they designate for writers and illustrators. But they designate certain of the meetups for authors who work in diversity. And so if anyone's interested, they can look on their website of the New England Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's in the chat, and look at their calendar and see if there are times that you'd want to meet. There are component society of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators that you mentioned, and that's a wonderful organization to join. They have a lot of workshops. They have conferences. In fact, New England has a conference in April this year in Springfield. But they also publish a lot of helpful information about lists of publishers that accept children's writing, and they also have a list of agents. So that's a whole other discussion about whether or not you want to try to get an agent first before you submit your writing to a publisher. And that can take a long time. I have an agent now, but it took me a number of years to secure that. But if you look at the list of agents and publishers, you'll see that these days, many, many, many agents and publishers are very interested in reviewing stories around diversity and authors of diverse backgrounds. So it's really quite an exciting time, I think, for people of different ethnicities or cultures to have their work shown and be interested by the publishing community. So I just wanted to pass that information along. And then the other group is the Writers Loft in Hudson, Mass, and they also offer workshops. And the last piece of advice I would have is that if you're serious about writing, you probably want to consider joining a writer's critique group that would meet a group of people who meet regularly, review each other's stories, and can give people advice about what to do. Because often when you're writing and you're thinking, boy, this sounds great, and this all makes sense, and then you present it to your group and they say, well, this whole paragraph needs to be cut out, and I think your character needs to, think about its heroic journey in a different way. And it's extremely helpful, as we do in medicine. We have curbside consults and we get other people's advice. And it's really important, I think, as a writer, to be open to the critique of fellow writers, and illustrators. I mean, these groups also both have writers and illustrators as part of them. So I really wanted to give a shout out to some very helpful organizations that I found.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. That was way many more organizations that I am aware, so I appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone here who's interested in learning more, I appreciate all your feedback. The question I was going to ask Dr. Guerra is, you mentioned some of the reactions of students who resonate with Salvador about their experience in I guess, healthcare delivery settings. And I'm wondering, are there any particular reactions that you've gotten from students, whether it's in kindergarten versus the college level, that have stuck with you and have made you realize the need for that book?
Yeah, well, most definitely. The biggest reactions that continue to greet me at these book readings is when a student will tell me, if they're in kindergarten, my older sister does this for my tia or my abuelita, a reminder that things haven't really changed in some ways. That experience from my experience with my grandmother as a 10-year-old is still being experienced to this day. And granted, things have gotten better, but it's a reminder of still more work needs to be done. I also get a lot of, your name is Juan, my name is Juan, or you speak Spanish too. And it just the opportunity for the students to identify with someone that hopefully they view me as a role model and lends a bit of reality to their dreams and their worlds. They really love the pictures, the illustrations of Victoria, and I get a lot of reactions about that. Again, it's the commonalities that they see in me are important. I did not meet my first Latino physician until I was a junior in college. Okay. And it was mind blowing to get advice from someone that looked like me, had, we shared common experiences. So I no longer underestimate what going out and reading a book to kindergartners and the potential that it has, how important that is. So yeah, I mean, that's why I keep doing it. The reactions are amazing. They're very diverse, and all very much necessary in their socialization moving forward.
Great, thank you. And Victoria, you were nodding, as Dr. Guerra talks about the illustrations. And that's the question I had for you. It seems like you talked about the motivating factors, the thing that move you, especially the hope and wonder that you want to instill in people reading the book. Any challenges you faced while illustrating the book?
Yeah, the challenges that I face, and actually I can show some of these if I could.
That would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see, I'm not sure. One of the things that I really thought was interesting about working on a children's book and working on specifically the process of publishing for a publisher was just the fact that what sort of ideas stick and what ideas come back to you in terms of when you show your illustrations. So these are my tests. This first image here is the first image that I submitted to Arte Publico, and just shows sort of my tone, what I wanted to impart with the illustrations, what I wanted to do with the colors, just sort of a really dreamy, non-specific kind of background for the characters, not background in terms of the story. Obviously, that was very specific, but the illustrations I wanted to be sort of a something that you could get a little bit lost in. And then the picture after this is the actual completed image that's from the book. So I tried to keep the colors, I tried to keep the style, I tried to keep the sort of the feeling of like a sidewalk chalk drawing, something that was meant to be fanciful, an introduction to a world that we know from daily experience, but that is still obviously clearly different. So the biggest challenges, of course, is to try and explain that to your art directors, to the directors, to the people who are also looking at the book. And it's not so much as a challenge as I just think it's very interesting. It's interesting to see what ideas stick, what sort of things that when I read the manuscript, to me felt like, okay, this is of like serious importance. And what the publisher, what the author himself, what children think is so interesting. I think there's two others here. I don't know. Aha. So here's like the first one with Salvador and Abuela. So I just wanted, again, to give a kind of like general feeling. My first image of showing like what's to come, sort of a more cloudy, a little bit more blues, grays, that sort of thing. And then I think the next one, if I got that right, this is probably my favorite, and I'm going to cover another question that I think you had for me, which was what was one of my favorite comments or reaction. And it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but my favorite thing is to see how the kids react to the mean doctor. Yeah, it seems like he's the most polarizing character. Mainly, and I think that's because kids want to empathize with Abuela and Salvador. They want to cheer them on. They know that that story is something that they want to hear. So when they see a stranger, when they see this doctor who is usually a caregiver, a safe person, acting unkindly, it felt really cruel to a lot of them. And, you know, more so than that, I also was sad to see that kids still have those experiences. Kids still have experiences with doctors, with caregivers, you know, teachers, any kind of person that they may see as a safe adult that could possibly make them feel like, hey, you know, I'm being neglected here in a way. You're not really recognizing my feelings in this involvement. And like, to me, I think that was really interesting, and in kind of a sad way. Like, I don't want to see the kids feel that way, but it was interesting to see what they reacted to. And I think that's exactly what you reacted to, Dr. Guerra, when you were young, that this is a person who's supposed to help me and help my grandmother, and he's not. So those examples of what my initial designs and then what became the final version, to me, I think those are kind of like the most interesting part of any artistic journey, is like, where did you start? Where did you end?
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. So nice to look again at the illustrations of the book. And, we have already established that it is so important to have books such as El Doctorcito for all kids to have access to different lived experiences, right? As you may have heard, they are currently book bans. So many of the books are being banned from schools and different places. What are your thoughts about that? And do you have any suggestions?
That's a very powerful question, and it elicits some very strong emotions in me. But I'll begin by saying, I just want to express my gratitude to the authors and the publishers and the illustrators that put those books together, that took the step to write and to use their voice to share their stories. I find that's the most powerful part of that reality. But to your question, it saddens me because books that are maybe looked at as different and polarizing are teaching opportunities and opportunities for us as a society to come together and educate one another about who we are, our perceptions, our biases, and it's an opportunity, but it's the unfortunate reality that we live in terms of these book bans. And but again, I look at them as opportunities for us to learn about each other and come together. Bringing together the vehicles that'll take us there is the next challenge.
Victoria, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I definitely think that losing the access to these books is cutting off conversations that need to happen. I mean, clearly there's a lot to be said for, age appropriate literature being shown to children who, something that may be challenging, something that may not make them feel great. And then being able to have a conversation, either you as a parent or you as an educator, and being able to talk about, like, why do these things make you feel bad? What do you think about these things? How would you feel if you were experiencing these things? And it's not something to shy away from. It's so important that people realize that being uncomfortable is a reality, and learning how to be uncomfortable and learning how to differentiate I'm uncomfortable from I'm in danger and I need to stand up for myself and I need to stand up for these people that need this assistance. Those are really important things. And what safer vehicle than a book? So I have a lot of opinions about that as well. And I really think that a lot of these misguided attempts at trying to shield people from things that may be hurtful really need to be looked at in an additional light.
Thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate your comments about this. I know it can be for authors, illustrators. It can be something that diminishes your work, like you mentioned. Ruben, please go ahead. You're still muted.
I had a couple of comments. First, with the banning of the books, which makes me think that it's another form of not listening to other people by saying we're not going to allow you to read these books, so we're not going to listen to what you're saying. And then the other comment I had was with the sadness I had in seeing my mother interact with people of like the government offices and people she needed to interact with, and she didn't know how to speak Spanish well. And when I saw her interactions, she humbled herself, and I could see that she felt less than. And it made me very sad because my mom was a very smart and strong person, and she was loving and caring, and she took care of us. And I just was astonished as a child to see how her behavior changed in those situations. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing.
That was something that over the years I really worked hard to try to empower patients. It's humility is very rich in our culture, the Latinx culture, and there's a limit or a healthy level of humility that is important to have. Especially when you're obtaining health care.
What sort of support do you wish you had, Dr. Guerra, when you're going through the healthcare system and kind of serving as an interpreter, an ambassador, almost like a patient navigator for your abuela? What kind of support you wish was there, or that should be here, given that you still hear children telling you, oh, this is still happening. This is exactly what my sister or my cousin does for this person or the other.
Sure. And the experiences vary throughout the United States in this day and age. But over the course of time, as a provider, when I first started, I was I'll give you an example. I remember being on labor and delivery when I was in Illinois. It was me and the janitor who spoke Spanish, and there were urgent needs to interpret for patients who are going into labor. That's an extreme example, but the use of having on-call staff as interpreters, or using telephone interpreters, video interpreters, to take that stress away from those emergent encounters. But also think about the privacy part. My abuela didn't have that privacy of having me in the room with her, and that's a critical part of the interaction with a physician. So essential steps such as those would be critical. I always advocated for increasing the number of the power brokers within the healthcare system, and I'm referring to doctors that are representing the more diverse communities. The catchphrase "bridging the gap between quality healthcare and the diverse communities seeking it" is emblazoned in my mind, and it's a mantra that has stayed with me over the years. So steps such as those were things that I advocated for over the years.
Yeah, no, that's great. Victoria, would you like to add anything?
No, I'm the experiences that I had, very different, obviously. And I feel like hearing that from a healthcare professional, from a physician, knowing that that's something that is that's a battle, but that's something that's being addressed is excellent, at least for me as a patient. I want to know that those sorts of steps are being taken.
Thank you. And yes, as a pediatrician, I care for patients and for pediatric patients, so children from the age of 12 all the way to 26. As an adolescent specialist, I can tell you that it's definitely improved. At least in my hospital, we have live interpreters, but we also have over the phone and iPad to make sure that the patients are receiving the care that they need, the quality care that's equitable, so they can understand and comprehend the recommendations that are given, and also act in a way that makes them feel empowered to do so. So we're coming towards the end of our program here. And I would like to thank everyone for coming today. What a wonderful conversation. Such a pleasure having you both here today. I'm really appreciative of your work. And now my DICP colleague, Susan Ledier, and the engineer of the Better Together Dialogues is going to launch a poll. If you can please take 5 to 10 seconds, that's all it takes to fill it out. We'll be grateful for your feedback. Again, thank you all for participating today, with special thanks to Dr. Juan Guerra and Victoria Castillo for sharing their book journey with us. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. I wish you all have a wonderful rest of the day.